Empecemos nuestro conversatorio con una pregunta para NACA. Llévenos al 1978, cuando se fundó el Paseo Taíno. Háblenos desde ese contexto, o sea, ¿qué estaba pasando ese año? ¿Por qué decidiste fundar el Paseo Taíno? ¿Y cuáles eran las metas de esa organización?
Sí, bueno, la necesidad vista de que en sí nuestro legado estaba oculto. Yo pertenezco y pertenecí al Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña debido a que llevo muchos años, ¿verdad?, en el arte, en el folclore, en todo el rescate, ¿verdad? Y vi, bueno, ellos me contrataban, mas sin embargo no aceptaban que había música taína. Yo no entendía. Y pues fui haciendo ese rescate, dije, pero si está el Mayoacán, están las maracas, encontramos silbatos decorosos, encontramos maracas monóxilas, encontramos raspadores, bueno, en fin, una gama de instrumentos con cuyos instrumentos había un espíritu, vamos a decir, de la manifestación de la esencia de nuestra gente. Y una cosa muy, muy bonita que experimenté en ese proceso fue el hecho de que cada instrumento se hace con la inteligencia de poder imitar el sonido del medio ambiente, de los animales, de la flora, de la fauna, en fin, el aire, la lluvia, el río. Me di cuenta entonces que era una vivencia que habían tenido nuestros ancestros, el poder plasmar esas voces en unos instrumentos. Y, en fin, experimenté un día en mi casa, me puse y grabé con los muchachos músicos. Vamos a hacer esto, vamos a recrear la naturaleza boricana. Y lo hicimos. Luego grabé el exterior, los coquíes, las chicharras, el múcaro, aquello, la grilla, lo otro. Cuando vinimos a ver, miren, sin mentirles, sonaba igual. Sonaba igual. Yo me maravillé y dije... Y entonces, claro, me puse también, hay algo muy importante, que nosotros aquí, mire, tenemos una conexión con nuestro DNA, los hijos, ¿verdad?, de esa herencia tan bonita, tan profunda, donde si canalizamos eso, ellos mismos, los maestros, nos van guiando, puesto que ustedes conocen que no hay mucho escrito específicamente sobre la estructura, por ejemplo, de los ritmos, de la música primitiva, de la música aborigen, de los rituales, de las ceremonias. Sí existían descripciones someras de lo que sería un areito y lo que lo constituía, pero no había un ejemplo fehaciente que digamos, mira, suena así o suena así. La gente pues me hacía esa pregunta, Naca, ¿pero cómo tú dices que esa es música taína si tú no tienes un ejemplo? Yo le contestaba esto. La conexión sobre lo que éramos y somos, la tenemos adentro. Mientras no haya esa conexión, nosotros no podemos darle continuidad a nuestra cultura, a nuestra vida, a nuestras creencias, porque hubo, como quien dice, el eslabón perdido que logró la conquista para entonces desaparecer todo el legado nuestro para enterrarlo. Pero esa guerrera por dentro me decía, no. Esta no es la verdad. Vamos a sacar la verdad. Pues entonces nos dimos a la tarea de unir esos instrumentos, de poner, por ejemplo, una mezcla que nunca se había hecho, el cuatro jíbaro puertorriqueño con un mayohuacán, con un bombo legüero de nuestros hermanos suramericanos, porque sí también sabemos, como le dije ahorita, es un solo pueblo y hemos recibido a través de esas estirpes y castas que vinieron y todos nos encontramos en la parte central de América, vamos a decir las tres Antillas mayores, donde ahí se asentó el reinado aborigen nativo. Y ahí recibimos de distintas etnias indígenas una evolución de nuestra esencia y estirpe. Eso me ayudó mucho. Y pudimos hacer esa mezcla. Cuando escuchamos su sonido, todo el mundo quedó en una pieza. Pero aún así, el Instituto de Cultura puertorriqueña nunca aceptó que había música taína. Mas, sin embargo, nos contrataban, eso sí. Bueno, pues en fin, nosotros dijimos, bueno, vamos a utilizar este foro, ¿verdad?, para nosotros entonces llevar como un vehículo educativo y de conciencia, porque una es la acción, ¿verdad?, material que se hace y otra es la trascendencia de esa acción, para concientizar al pueblo. Mira, pero ¿quién dijo que no había música taína? Miren esto es una cosa, la sinfonía borincana, que es una belleza. Y nuestros niños, ay Dios mío, cuando yo voy a las escuelas y le enseño, mira, esto suena así, este es el coquí, este es la palomita mañanera, este es la grilla, el grillo, bueno, el múcaro. Y ellos se quedaban. Todas las veces que hemos ido hay una sed de conocimiento. Y eso es lo que tenemos que sembrar. Tenemos que empezar con la nueva semilla para que ellos sigan llevando, ¿verdad?, ese conocimiento a sus familiares, a otros hermanos, a otros niños. Y así fue como se fusionó esa parte del paseo taíno, como decía, la música de los orígenes. Porque pues yo comencé en la conciencia de ser una jíbara. Pero entonces el mismo concepto jíbaro, que lo compartía el otro día, jiba, bosque, ro, hombre agreste, hombre de bosque. Y es esa armonía que existe el hombre que vivió constantemente conociendo el idioma de la naturaleza. Y una vez lo conoció, pues entonces sí podía saber los astros, la luna, el sol, las estrellas, las mareas, las estaciones, la siembra. Y en fin, pues así fue que creció ese concepto, ¿verdad?, de lo que es Paseo Taíno, porque aunque yo le menciono una acción de los comienzos, quiero que sepan que estamos llevando la cultura y el conocimiento y la educación todavía, así como Travesía Taína también. Y en fin, pues ese fue la simbiosis que hicimos.
Gracias, Anaca. Y antes de hacerle una pregunta a Jorge, ¿nos puedes nombrar algunos de los otros grupos o personas o familias inclusive que estaban participando en este movimiento emergente hacia el 1980, por ejemplo?
80, bueno, cuando comenzó Paseo Taíno, todavía no habían, vamos a decir, unos grupos identificados, porque como le digo, el movimiento moderno, actual, oficializado, no había comenzado porque nos faltaban recursos, herramientas para nosotros establecer esa identidad. Había mucho miedo y había bochorno, porque a nosotros siempre nos trataron como la raza social peor y lo hacían peyorativamente a propósito. Nos negaron los derechos a practicar y establecer nuestra lengua nativa. Además de eso, pues se reían y se burlaban. Sí, los jíbaros, esos no saben nada. Esos son unos brutos, perdonando la expresión. Pero sin embargo era lo contrario. El jíbaro era el que tenía la sabiduría, el conocimiento sobre lo que somos. ¿Ve? Y al pues tratarnos de ese modo, la gente tenía miedo de identificarse para que no se rieran o se burlaran, ¿verdad?, de ellos. En ese interín, pues yo conocí no grupos como tal, pero sí de entre los estudiantes que se reclutaban, muchos de los líderes de hoy salieron de ese encuentro, porque los educamos y entonces ellos pues se prepararon, crecieron y entonces formaron sus respectivos grupos y organizaciones, de lo cual pues me siento muy orgullosa, ¿verdad?, que todos hayan seguido ese camino y que perseveren en ese camino. Y así fue, luego como entonces se dirigieron muchos grupos, ¿verdad?, y de ahí pues salió el movimiento como tal.
Gracias.
Yeah.
George, you were talking earlier about your connection with Native North American communities and your relationship with them and how that evolved. Could you kind of take us back to that moment and talk a little bit more about that evolution of what you learned from the American Indian movement here in the United States and how that has influenced your sense of Taino-ness? And you can even also talk about the sort of more global contemporary indigenous movement, how your sort of sense of being Taino fits in with all of that.
Well, my personal evolution with the North American Indian, I mean, I grew up with this identity, basically, you know, and when I was about 20 years old, actually about 21, I had my own business, and I was doing pretty well back then, and I would travel out to Arizona to the powwows, but I started noticing certain similarities with certain things. You know, like one of the first connections that I made was the very first time that I went to a Native community out west was the pointing with the lips. You know, and I thought that was such a Dominican thing or Puerto Rican thing or Caribbean, and there I was, you know, like the Indians were like, and I'm like, oh, I understand what he's saying, and I'm, oh yeah. You know, that's in a hurry, you know, and whatever, you know. So I started noticing these connections, and like I said before, you know, for me it was a matter of going out west and being accepted in a way, and then coming back here and always being denied that or always being critiqued for that. I totally understand what you said about el bochorno that you feel with that. The reason why I kind of gravitated away from that back then was because I received like an epiphany of sorts. You know, like I was going out there quite constantly at a certain time, and I really did appreciate everything that I learned. You know, like you know, with the American Indian Church, spirituality, and the culture that I was understanding, their culture. And then on a trip that I made going out there, and I wish I had done it coming back, but it was on a trip there, I realized that in a way I was kind of using the people that I was going out to see, you know, and I felt ashamed of myself for that, because they were feeding my identity in a sense, you know. So I felt that it was time to come back home and continue this search. But my life kind of took a real side turn, which I'm not going to get into right now. But when I finally came back to the fold was the story that I told earlier. So what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
No, and what about connections with the sort of more global indigenous movements? I mean, I know you have really focused back on the Caribbean and are doing a lot of exchanges now with your community and like Loconos in Guyana and other native groups. So
yeah, well, for me, the Taino connection was being able to meet other people from Arawakan, cultures. Like, for example, at the very moment, my focus is on Tamani or Agua Dulce, which is a spirituality that persists in San Juan de la Maguana. And going back and researching and looking at this spirituality that was written about by people like C.H. Digoji and those scholars from back then, you see this amazing connection, and so my work has been connecting these dots, and you find that the campesinos of the Caribbean today, we're very much similar to them. If you just take the time to actually look at the culture, you find that we are very much connected to them. So that's where I go. I always look for the connections to compare and contrast and see where we're very similar and where we differ.
Thank you. And we have about 10 minutes before we go to the Q&A, and I really want to respect that because I know there's some questions in the audience, no doubt. So how about we do a question with you, Sherina, y luego pasamos a la abuela antes de pasar a la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Sherina, you are a sociolinguist, an anthropologist. Anaka and La Abuela have mentioned this issue of language, Arawak, Island Arawak, Taino. The Taino language is a heritage language that people are trying to reconstruct and recover. Can you, as a scholar, sort of studying this, what's your take on it?
Yeah. So I'm a linguistic anthropologist, and it means, just to give you a step back, I entered the research actually interested in language recovery efforts. That was kind of my question. A lot of Native American groups, which is one of the main groups that I sort of saw as comparative for my own research, one way in which people show continuity, which has been one way in which indigenous people have been measured, right, in terms of their existence, has been showing continuity, has been through language. And Puerto Rico, we have to remember the Taino, they're sort of the first case of encounter, right? it's where the narrative of extinction sort of got played out for the first time, the one that became the script from which a lot of indigenous groups throughout the Americas also became sort of read and narrated. And when you kind of have the Taino case, one thing that ends up happening is, the parts that we have in the chronicles, it's very limited in terms of what they wrote about the language. A lot of other sort of Native American groups, by the time the missionaries came, they were creating Bibles or sort of dictionaries so that they could communicate and or convert these particular people, right? But that wasn't happening with the Taino case. So I asked myself, what are people using, or how are people recovering the language, or what do people understand the Taino language to be? And as you would expect, the answers were so many among different sets of Taino groups. There are different sets of assumptions. I spent time with a number of groups, and some groups, and this has been mentioned, understand Taino, and this isn't what most research shows, but understand the Taino to be a Mayan language, so they've come to sort of learn particularly Yucatec Mayan as sort of a point of reference for Taino. Most linguists argue that Taino is an Arawak language based on whatever little bit we have from the chronicles. So a lot of people, including groups like the Taino Nation and sort of groups in Puerto Rico, sort of look to the Arawak language and the multiple sort of dictionaries that are there to sort of use at least the words within their everyday talk. One thing that's a little bit more difficult to recover are things like syntax, the grammar that you use to sort of organize your language and have meaning. So those efforts people have often done by comparative sort of research with like Lokono or other sort of Arawak languages that are still spoken today. But in addition to all of these efforts and teaching kids in schools, and Yare's program is doing that too, sort of words, sort of writing, having children help produce the language through the ability that we all have, which is amazing does anyone here remember their first language when you learned it? But do you remember sort of like someone telling you, the sentence is organized, we just know how to produce language through the input that we get. That's an amazing power kids have. So a lot of groups are thinking of how we can use kids to help us know the language. So we see some of that. But another thing that I found through my research, just to sort of close, is, and this is something Shashira, I kept asking her when I was doing my research with her, and I see her here, and this is why. Voy a contarle de la vez que me puso a ver el árbol. I kept asking her and pushing her, and I was like, what is the, Taino communication? What is Taino talk? And she would be like, go cut some yuca, go carve an higuera, do something else. And I would stay over, and she woke me up one morning, and she sat me down. She was very, very gracious and always had a coffee and some eggs and some toast. And she sort of sat me down, told me to shut up, and she left, and she was like, just listen. So I was there, and I was listening, and listening, and listening, and it was a tree, wind, and a whole bunch of pigeons. And she comes out later, and she was like, if you sit in silence, you'll hear. And she said, being a Taino, you keep asking me about Taino communication, and she would say, being a Taino for her, and it's one perspective that stuck with me through thinking about lots of things, right? It's not about the words that you use always. It's not about the way in which you can put together a sentence. Sometimes it's about being able to listen and hear particular kinds of messages, to understand the story. I had a lot of storytelling and answers to questions. To hear the story, to understand why the story is being told to you. It's not just what is said, but how it's said. And what that sort of brought to me as a linguistic anthropologist is when we think about recovery, and this is a challenge a lot of Native American groups have, is sometimes they can recover the language, but there's also a challenge of recovering the context for the use of that language, the understanding of how to make sense of how to appropriately speak. When is your turn to speak? When is it your turn to stay quiet? And those were the things that kind of got highlighted in a lot of my research, and it kind of helped broaden for me my conception of how I was going to talk about language recovery. And it helped me understand that sometimes For many Taínos, speaking Taíno can happen in Spanish or English, as long as the appropriate ways of listening, the appropriate ways of making sense are there. And that, for me, that was a broadening concept and one that, I try to write about and sort of thinking about these issues.
Great, thank you. And thank you. Yes, we have about 5 minutes before the Q&A, and I know that La Abuela wants to share a message and actually a song with you. And I think Brenda is going to come up and to do some accompaniment with the Mayohuacán. So Anaca, La Abuela, Brenda Lugo, the accompanist, the floor is yours for the next few minutes para compartir este mensaje y esta canción con nosotros.
Yo también le quería decir.
El micrófono, por favor. El alambrito, háblale el alambrito.
Pues es que yo soy del fútbol.
Y yo puedo agarrar simplemente sostenerlo en la mano si quiere.
Ok. Ay, qué pantalla. Oh, ay. Yo quiero que vamos para la canción, ¿no?
No, di tu mensaje primero.
Ok. Yo quiero que, como le dije, que sepan que aquí tenían aquí una abuela. Una abuela para enseñar, como dijo aquí, esta muñequita que tengo para aquí, que va a enseñarle con lo que ustedes van a ver, con lo que ustedes saben. Dice, ¿cómo voy a enseñarme con lo que ya yo sé? Sí, cambiar ese modo de ver y de vivir. También quiero que se nos ayude a que en las escuelas de Puerto Rico se hable nuestro idioma taíno, porque si nos quieren imponer el idioma, como yo digo, chino, ¿ah?
Mandarín.
El mandarín, que lo respeto, pero es de allá. ¿Por qué entonces no se puede enseñar el idioma del taíno? Porque el taíno tenía su propio, y tenemos nuestro propio idioma. Porque cuando a un pueblo se le quita su idioma, le quita la vida. ¿Ok? Quiere decir, eso es uno de los reclamos que yo voy a seguir haciendo en el Departamento de Instrucción Pública en Borinquen. Y quiero apoyo de cada uno de ustedes, que escriban, que digan qué pasa, porque el taíno no ha muerto, el taíno está vivo, y el taíno vive, 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 vive. Ay, perdonen que me quedó que esta canción no la traemos. Esto que va a pasar ahora son el mensaje de nuestras piedras de Borinquen, que quisimos que llegara aquí y hoy se va a interpretar aquí por primera vez. Y es mensaje que le escuchen, que escuchen su mensaje, que no es un embeleco, que es sentimiento directo de nuestras piedras y nuestra tierra, cada letra. Ok. Es que después de viejo guían a uno. ¿Sabes? Mira, hasta aquí me siento como nena buena, vamos. Que me regañan a mí.
El taíno vive, en nuestra tierra, con sus montañas verdes, rodeado por sus piedras, piedras muy hermosas, con mensajes dentro de ellas. Son nuestros ancestros que nos dejaron sus huellas. ¡Au! 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 El viento que sopla, mensajes de las estrellas, son nuestros abuelos que aún viven dentro de ellas. Son nuestras raíces que van surcando la tierra, sus profundidades, semiblanco que destella. ¡Au! 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 Coro, coro. ¡Au! Nuestra sangre llama y proclama su existencia. Sus huesos reclaman, levantando la conciencia. Nuestro abuelo fuego, sus memorias nos relata. Nuestra raza vive y su alma ahora canta.
¡Au! Que se escuche ese aú, vamos. ¡Au! 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 ¡Au!
El taíno vive, vive en nuestra tierra. Nuestra nación no muere, la raza raíz despierta.
¡Au! No se oye. ¡Au! Vamos a intervenir este edificio con el au, vamos. ¡Au!
¡Au! ¡Au!
Ahora, en los próximos 15 minutos que nos quedan, we've got 15 minutes left to wrap up this session. We welcome you to come down to the mics. Adrian is here on my left. If anybody has would like the mic taken up to them, if you have issues coming down the stairs, let him know. And quick reminder, all questions, keep them brief, keep your comments short, because I think there are a lot of people with something to say.
And if you'd like to come down, please make your way down, and my colleague and I will receive you.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Isabel Espinal. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, but both of my parents are from the Dominican Republic, and they're from the Cibao region. So my question is for Jorge, but also maybe for the linguistic anthropologist, because I always wondered about the way that we speak Spanish, because I tried to explain how this, in the Cibao, instead of saying hablar, we say hablai, capitai. We have a certain way that is very unique, and I was trying to explain that to a Colombian friend, and she told me that in Colombia, the Guajiros, this native group, speak very similarly. So I wondered if the way we speak Spanish, which is now disappearing, but if there is a connection with that. And then the other thing for Dominicans is, like, when I start talking about the Taíno heritage as our heritage, a lot of Dominicans see that as denying our blackness and our African roots. So I wondered if you had anything to say to that as well, or anyone else.
Well, to the second part, no. And to the first part, I'll say that when I first started looking into that, el hablar con la I larga, I was told that it was actually Galician Spanish, because in la gente de Galicia, they have a way, they have certain words that they use con la I larga, like vamos a veis, que se va seis. But when you look at el cibaeño, hablar cibaeño, yo soy cibao también, we have a tendency to turn all our R's and our L's into I larga. So we will say things like beide instead of verde, like that. And I find that the people in Cuba and Eastern Cuba, they do that as well as in Latin Puerto Rico, they do that. And again, I've seen that amongst people in Colombia and Venezuela. So for me, it is definitely un rasgo indígena lingüístico.
Serena, did you want to add to that?
Sure. To the first question, I mean, is this thing still on? In terms of the language, and I'll try to keep it brief because I don't want to enter into professor mode right now. It's complicated, right? Caribbean Spanish has very particular histories and influences, and of course, especially one thing that I found, and some people have actually sort of written down, a lot of the vocabulary. I mean, just to be clear, a lot of the vocabulary in English comes from Taíno, right? Hammock, maíz, all of these words, maize, all of these words, this was the first time Europeans had encountered this sort of new world. They didn't have, not new world to them, obviously not new to the indigenous people, but to them, as they were writing down, because they had that particular practice, they didn't have the terminology for this stuff. So our Spanish and even our English is influenced by Taíno from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. So in the campos, people still use a lot of language that's going to reflect those exchanges. And sort of speaking to the sort of question of race, that's a complicated one, and I think the third panel will be talking a little bit more about that. But we can't look at these things outside of the histories of the places, right? So in the Dominican Republic, you have a very specific context for why that gets posed vis-a-vis the sort of Haitian relationship, right? And that's its own history that people have written about. My response tends to be to this is, why do we think of these two backgrounds as mutually exclusive in the first place? And I think if we come with that particular understanding, really then the issue that we want to be thinking about is the processes of settler colonialism that posit different sets of minoritized and marginalized groups against each other.
Buenas tardes. My name is Martin Walker. I'm involved in projects in land recovery and healing on the island of Vieques, Puerto Rico, La Isla Nena. And I have a particular question for Jorge Esteves, and I appreciate your presence here. When you spoke of the traditions of Agua Dulce, one of the things we've discovered is that cultural land recovery involves reliving actual practices, and I'm wondering if you could say something specific about the Agua Dulce practices or spirituality as it exists today.
Well, first of all, you know, I've been reading Sven Loven over again for the third time, I think. And one of the things that a lot of the you know, historians said was that a lot of the caciques would become semis after they passed away. So in Agua Dulce, you have this tendency of a lot of the past caciques, those that are historical, but you also find a whole lot of other names that are not historical that have been turned into these spirits that people deify today. So that's one thing. Another thing is how they relate to the land and you know, how you plant. You have to ask for permission, praying to the four directions. I mean, all of the things that you see in other native groups, you find in Agua Dulce, but really, very, very pronounced. So yeah, it's really vast. You know, you couldn't explain all of it in just one conversation.
And Jorge's article on Agua Dulce is available for free in the magazine that we're giving away
great.
at the entrance, along with an article on Taino spirituality by Cristina Gonzalez, who's here.
Thank you for your questions, sir.
Thank you. We have another question here.
Good morning. My name is Estela Natal. I am an educator and a writer, and I just got back from Peru, where I taught English to preschoolers and high schoolers outside of Lima, and I went to Machu Picchu. This event was on my radar. I learned about it through Facebook, and then after going to Machu Picchu, I said, I have to go because I have to connect with my roots. And according to Ancestry.com, I'm 11% Taína, and yay! And I know now why I'm a guerrera, and I'm always a rebel finding a cause. So I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I would love for her and other children to learn about our Taíno culture. I would love to put together a cartilla fonética Taína and a very comprehensive Taíno book. Can you connect me with the right people? Because I'm ready to go.
I think some of them are here in the in our space right now. Thank you.
Who should I speak to? During the break?
Yeah, during the break, right after this program.
Okay, because
We'll connect you.
I'm on a mission now.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria. My family is Puerto Rican. I lived in Puerto Rico for 5 years as a child, but once I moved back to the United States, I sort of lost my Spanish. My great-grandmother identified as Taíno. My Spanish is not that good, but I tried to listen as intently as I could, and I heard a lot of talk of no shoes. And my great-grandmother never wore shoes. Even as the island modernized, she refused. As an adult, I explored spirituality through psychedelics, and it was through psychedelics that I learned about Cohoba, and that sort of led me back to Taíno culture and wanting to learn more. Now, a lot, like you had said, I worry about seeming inauthentic because I didn't grow up with Taíno culture. My great-grandmother did, and not a lot of it was passed along as we modernized. How can someone like me become involved in the movement and learn? Like, where would be the best place for someone like me to start to get involved in the Taíno movement?
Well, I think that, first of all, we've all grown up with Taíno culture, you know, in one way or another. And I think that, you know, thank you. But I think that your exploration should be, you know, looking through all the groups, meeting everybody, you know, you'll find where you fit in. But if you're from the island, from any of the islands, you fit, you know, and you're always welcome, absolutely.
But would there be like a specific organization that because you mentioned so many.
Well,
I
I'm
wrote
going to
them
be
all
biased.
down.
I'm going to say come to mind, of course. But in all fairness, I think that anyone that you try is going to be good because we're all really good. We have differences, but we're all really on the same mission. That's the truth. Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Anaka, ¿querías...?
¿En español?
Ok, sí, la abuela,
Ay,
por favor.
Ay, espere, ¿qué quieren que siga yo con el
Háblele al
bejuco?
alambito nomás.
Entiende un poquito.
Dale el fotuto.
¿Tú entiendes español? Ah, sí, ok. Mira, vea. cuando quieras aprender a ser indígena, aprender a ser taíno, pues mira, aquí tienes esta anciana. No te enseñará con muchos libros, pero te enseñará con su experiencia en la vida. En mi libro Sin Páginas, ¿ok? Viviendo los 24, como aprendió esta que está aquí.
Muchas gracias.
Hi, my name is Cybele, and I'm kind of on this ancestral mission to like really find out about a lot of my roots. And my mother is Hispanic, and on her side of the family, her mother is from Isabela, Puerto Rico, and her father is from Honduras. So I know there's a ton of history in both of these areas, and I've just been trying very hard to find about, pre-Spanish colonization. I've been really trying hard to find that, and not even just in terms of a cultural aspect, but also really know who my ancestors are. And I don't know, kind of what to do about that. I mean, I know there's these things like Ancestry, and I tried that, and I don't find a lot of public records and stuff, especially in Honduras.
Well, if you turn around, there actually happens to be a Honduran archaeologist right behind you. So, she might be the start of the conversation for you. Yeah.
I gotta talk about
But it'll be a journey, and so you're going to be speaking to many people, and aprovecha.
Yeah, because one of the things that we did manage to find was a General Solis in Honduras, and we think that because that was a family that my grandfather's mother was a servant for.
Yeah.
And-
Lots of complicated a lot of folks who are involved in genealogy find that they uncover a lot of complicated family histories that make the task really kind of more difficult than you'd think at first.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and there are going to be
especially
lots of folks here in the audience who are involved in genealogical searches. So one of the things that we really encourage the audience to do is hang out during the breaks, get to know each other, go out to lunch, make some new friends, and I bet that you will hopefully find, if not answers, at least some folks that will be able to sort of guide you in sort of the direction that you want to go in.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to know more about him. And also on my grandmother's side of the family, did anybody identify as Taino? Was that even on record? I know the Spanish kept a lot of really good records, but I don't know how they organized that. And also their records tended to be biased.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you for your question, and hopefully we'll be able to help you out today as a result of hanging out with some of the great folks here.
thank you so much for doing this. This is, I feel like, something that for a lot of us, we feel like has been erased, and we're trying to unerase it. Thank you so much.
So we have time for one last question. So please make it to the point.
Buenas tardes, sí, mi nombre es Cruz Gámez, yo soy locutor y conductor del programa La Otra Cara del Planeta por Radio Indígena 94.1 FM en Oxnard. Somos parte del proyecto Mixteco Indígena y bueno, estamos nosotros promoviendo obviamente ¿verdad? La unión y pues el reconocimiento de muchos de nuestros pueblos originarios. Vemos mi pregunta, ¿verdad? Tengo un par de preguntas, obviamente sé que el teléfono, perdón, que el tiempo es bastante estrecho, pero bueno, sabemos nosotros que nuestras culturas han sido amenazadas por la extinción, obviamente, por el europeísmo, por las invasiones, por la llamada conquista, ¿verdad? A nuestro esfuerzo, ¿verdad? Veo el esfuerzo taíno por rescatar su cultura, la integridad cultural. Pero bueno, he visto, ¿verdad?, que hay algunas conexiones entre el lenguaje, ¿no? Tales como la palabra batey, los pueblos Cayey y Camuy. Hay algunas palabras que se han incorporado, por ejemplo, a la lengua o a la jerga boricua, como digamos, ¿no? Del taíno, como en el caso de nosotros, ¿verdad? Los mexicanos integramos muchas palabras indígenas de diferentes regiones, ya que somos pues muchos pueblos, ¿verdad? Muchas comunidades. Cada estado tiene diferentes comunidades e influencias, ¿verdad? Culturales de la fonética de cada una de las lenguas o dialectos. Hay algunos dialectos, algunas palabras que se incorporan del taíno hacia la lengua del puertorriqueño.
Como arroz picado. ¿Por qué no cerramos con algunas palabras comunes taínas de la República Dominicana y de Puerto Rico?
Bueno, yo les diré que yo he viajado bastante para México.
Sí.
Mi padrastro era mexicano, inclusive.
Gracias y viva Puerto Rico libre.
Y le diré que yo encontré muchas palabras caribeñas en México. Yo tengo un diccionario náhuatl que es bastante viejo y dice ahí que después del náhuatl, el taíno que ha influenciado más al español mexicano. Porque fue que los españoles cuando salieron de Cuba hacia México, ellos llevaban ya muchas palabras taínas para allá. Allá yo encontré batey, encontré mamey,
Sí.
etcétera, etcétera. Biiba, que es nosotros le llamamos el tabaco, en sí es coiba, allá le llaman biiba.
Ok.
Eso lo encontré yo entre los yaquis.
Sí.
Y ellos decían que era una palabra que habían aprendido. También es interesante cómo se ha difundido el idioma. Ahora le diré que hasta en Nuevo México, la esposa mía y yo una vez estábamos allá y encontramos un pueblo de nativos en uno de los pueblos que usaban la palabra cacique, que es una palabra del Caribe. Ahí está.
Casi que lo entendemos nosotros como un explotador, ¿verdad? Como lo que ustedes llaman mayoral. Pero bueno, hay algo otros aspectos culturales como nosotros tratamos de rescatar nuestras danzas, ¿verdad? Y promoverlo. Hay algunas danzas taínas, algunos bailes taínos, de ceremoniales, tal vez, de rituales que siguen vivos.
Los hay, pero lo vamos a tener que discutir durante el almuerzo. Porque lamentablemente esta sesión se ha acabado. We will take an 1 hour break. And right now we're going to have a book signing. Dreaming of Mother Earth. Jose Barrero is the author, and he will be doing a book signing outside of the shop.
Yes.
Correct? ¿Te parece? So,
José
yeah.
Barrero.
Muchas gracias a nuestros invitados hoy. Please give your hands up for our
Les regalo
participants
esto.
today. Please come back at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. is the start of our next session, Genetic Science and Genealogy, Recovering Native Ancestry.